Go ahead. Somebody tell me about the choking case. Go ahead.
Wasn't it like a girl? She choked her boyfriend, and then later she asked for, like, the police came to her and they saw that she had blood on her hand or fingernails.
Yeah.
And she put it in her pocket.
Tried to scratch it off.
Yeah.
And what they do?
They forced it out of her hand and they saw it and then they tested the blood and found it was her that choked her.
Yeah, this was the example of the girlfriend that killed the boyfriend because he cheated, if you remember. And in this particular situation, she went into the police station. They're like, listen, your boyfriend's been killed. Can you come down? We just want to talk to you, get an idea of maybe who had some beef with him. And in fact, the girl went down to the police station and she still had some blood on her. Excuse me. The police at that point said, what's that on your hands? And she tried to kind of destroy the evidence. And if you remember, they took her hands out, they got a sample, they matched it with the boyfriend's blood, and ultimately they charged her. Why was this illegal? Why was this a legal search? Go ahead, Nolan.
Because it was outside of her body.
Okay, it was outside of her body. That's one. So this was not invasive like making somebody vomit. There were several other things on this. Go ahead, Katie.
She voluntarily entered the police station.
You always got to be careful because if you voluntarily offer the police evidence, and remember, she was not detained, they did not read her rights, but they didn't have to because she voluntarily came into the station. She could have just as easily said no. There was a third piece to this. She voluntarily went down there, and what was the other one? She was destroying evidence in front of the police officers. They did not need a warrant if she was destroying the evidence in front of them. And at that point, so it was external, it was not an invasive search. She was destroying evidence that was in front of them, and this was voluntary when she went into the police station. So all of these meant it was a legal search, and they were able to convict her. They didn't convict the vomit guy. What about the shot in the ass?
Someone.
Yeah, y'all remember that. Yeah, I remember that one. Go ahead.
Someone was shot in the butt. And, and he went and I think he committed some crime. I don't remember what, but the question was if they could make him
if they could get the bullet, they could match it to the gun, and they would know that he robbed the store.
Yeah,
could they get it?
Only if he had the doctor take it out.
If the doctor took it out, then the bullet would not be invasive at that point.
Yes.
It would be out on the counter. They could get a warrant and they could get it, but they couldn't get a warrant literally to go into his rear end to get this bullet out. And the trick on this, and think about this within the context of something being invasive. You know, you do a breathalyzer, technically they're searching stuff that is outside of you. That's legal, it's not invasive. If you're pulling something off of a person's fingernail, it's external. They can get this. If the bullet is removed, and doctors can remove bullets, if you get shot, you know, and you get taken into the emergency room and you're out, they will take it out in order to save you. However, you could decline that. I mean, especially if you get shot in the rear end. I mean, there's a lot of padding back there for some of us, right? So when you put this into context, it's not an area that in fact is going to be life or death. And if that's the case, if you say no, then they can't force you to get that taken out. So keep these searches and seizures in mind. And remember, if you volunteer evidence, it can be used against you. So police officers, and I had mentioned this, they will come up to you and they'll talk to you just about stuff. They're always nice at the scene of the crime. And they're talking to you, they kind of are your friend, this kind of a thing, but they can use what you say against you because you're not technically detained, you're volunteering it. And I think I had mentioned to y'all the chicken gizzards and the collard greens, because that can force bodily functions to come out. You're volunteering the evidence. Yeah, I know. Any other questions from chat? Go ahead.
So, I just have a question on how the questions are. Like, are you going to just give us one of these terms and then tell us to give like a case?
No, not necessarily. What I'll probably do is, if it's a multiple choice question, odds are there will be some that will just be kind of straightforward, like how many peaceful midterm, presidential, and midterm elections have we had? You know, that's pretty straightforward. I mean, that's going to be 115. Yeah, it's going to be 115. Yeah, I make some typos. But with that being said, some of these others might involve stories. So maybe Erica's boyfriend was cheating on her, and she kills him, and she chokes him, and you kind of see where the question's going now. You see what I'm saying?
You kinda
So,
have to come up with one of these
so you would
terms.
have to come up with an answer based on some of these. And I'll break the exam up so that it deals with terms and it deals with articles. So if a question is in the term section, all you're going to have to be thinking about are the terms to pull from. If it's in the article section or the link section, then it'll be dealing with articles or links. So it should narrow it down a little bit. Go ahead, V.
So all these examples you were giving is just for balancing, right? Or were you talking about other ones?
These were all balancing because these were
Okay.
dealing with searches and seizures. And I thought
criminal-
somewhere up there, yeah, criminal searches.
Yeah.
So this falls under criminal searches and it could fall under balancing, yes.
Okay.
Yes,
That's what I
yes.
So there'll be a question about like how many articles in the Constitution there are, or what what's in which one.
I guess I could give you something like that. That sounds really easy though. I don't think I like that question. Alejandro, I believe I saw your hand.
The Evolution Revolution for Chapter 3.
Devolution Revolution was dealing with President Reagan, and if you remember when we talked about this, I had mentioned that government kept growing, kept growing, kept growing. When it got to Reagan, Reagan was actually the person that attempted, he said government is the problem, not the solution. And Reagan was somebody that didn't cut government, but he slowed its growth. Bill Clinton was somebody that didn't cut government, but he slowed its growth. And there's a sense now that after you've had years of W and years of Barack, government has grown even bigger. There's a sense that more people that are in office now want to cut it back again. Cut it back again. So that's devolution, revolution. Go ahead.
The growth of the government, does that mean it's power? Or
Growth of the federal government in terms of power, but maybe in terms of like people that work there, the expenses of it. I mean, everything. So if you cut back the expenses, you cut back the people that are working there, you give more functions to the states, you let them decide how they want to do things instead of the federal government saying you do it our way. That's what we're talking about. Go ahead.
Can you like go over like the articles?
I will. Let me go through some more terms, and I promise I'm going to have some time at the end. Go ahead, Laura Q.
808 in chapter 2. 1808, my bad.
1808. What was 1808? Go ahead, Giovanni.
Wasn't it that year that like it was like a clause and it's like slave only states after 1808 there would be no more slave trade?
No more international slave trade. There were two clauses specifically that we talked about in the Constitution that dealt with slavery. One was the 1808 clause. And basically it said from 1789 until 1808, that 20-year period, the southern states, any state really, would be free to participate in the international slave trade. They could not end the idea of slavery, but they thought if they ended the slave trade, then gradually the slaves would die off, and then we wouldn't have this anymore. But it didn't. They just accelerated the growth is basically what happened, and it made it worse than it would have been. You remember the other provision? Anybody?
3/5.
3/5. What was the 3/5 clause?
Slaves times 3/5.
5 slaves equals 3 people, or a slave counts as 3/5 of a person. Why or how? Go ahead.
Well, it was actually twofold because the southern states wanted to count the slaves as people for representation.
Yes.
They get more representation.
Yes.
But that also meant that they'd have to pay higher taxes. And so the compromise of the 3/5 was so that they would get the more, they would get some better representation, but also wouldn't have to pay, but would only have to pay some additional taxes.
Yeah, it was based on, taxes were based on the number of population, and representation in Congress was too. So the argument was that southern states wanted slaves to count as a full person for representation, but not to count for taxes. Northern states wanted the slaves to count as a full person for taxes, but not for representation. The compromise, you're absolutely right, was 3/5. So a slave would count for 3/5 of a person for representation, and then ultimately for taxation. So there's 1808, there was 3/5. And then the other thing that I mentioned really in all the classes, I think just this week, or at the very end of last week, was the Fugitive Slave Clause. If you remember, that was in the section that dealt with full faith and credit. What else have y'all got just in terms of terms?